The town of Eziora was known for its evening haze, smoke rising from smoky fires, mingling with the laughter of children and the scent of roasted yams. But more than that, Eziora was known for a place that never rested. Madam Nene's kitchen. It was a modest restaurant, crouched at the edge of the main road, painted red and gold, with plastic chairs that never stayed empty for long. Every afternoon, villagers flocked there like moths to flame. Some claimed it was the pepper soup, so rich it could make a grown man cry. Others whispered about the jollof rice that tasted like it held a secret. The reason? The truth was simple. Once you tasted Madam Nene's food, nothing else would satisfy you again. That evening, the restaurant buzzed as usual. Smoke curled in the air, carrying the scent of fresh spices. Madam Nene moved between tables like a shadow, wide-hipped, sharp-eyed, her voice like oil on hot stone. Her assistant, a quiet teenage girl named Adaze, stood behind the counter, grinding pepper with slow, tired hands. "Add more crayfish," Madam Nene ordered without looking, "and stir it twice." Adaze obeyed. She always did. She had arrived from the nearby village of Umuoke just a few months ago, after her mother sent her to stay with a relative for better opportunities. That relative was Madam Nene, an old friend of her late uncle, or so the story went. On most days, Adaze kept to herself. She didn't laugh with the boys who hovered near the shop. She didn't gossip with the other kitchen girls. She stirred, swept, sliced, and served. That night, however, something felt off. She kept glancing toward the back room, a door that was always locked, always dark. A strange smell had been leaking from under it all day. It wasn't meat, it wasn't spice, it was something else, something bitter, like old iron and damp cloth. Adaze had mentioned it once. "Old pots," Madam Nene said, wiping her hands, the smell of memories. Just before closing, Madam Nene stepped out to the backyard. She was gone only for a minute. When she returned, her eyes were different. Glassy, distant. She walked past Adaze without speaking and headed for the kitchen's back corner, where an old black pot sat untouched. Nobody ever used that one. It was too big, too dark, too silent. Later, the customer left and silence fell over Eziora. Madam Nene handed Adaze a worn shopping bag. "Go to the house," she said. "Get rice. The sack in the back store. You remember where it is, eh?" Adaze hesitated. "Now? It's late. I said go." The streets of Eziora were dim by then, lit only by flickering lanterns and the moon's watchful eye. She walked quickly, her sandals tapping against dusty ground. Madam Nene's house stood at the end of the lane, tall, shadowed, too quiet. When she pushed the door open, the air inside greeted her like a wall. Still. Thick. Cold. The light didn't move. The silence buzzed. She stepped in. Far behind her, unseen in the dark, a shadow moved. And the door clicked shut. Froze. The door had slammed shut behind her, fast and final. Then, click, click. 2 locks turned in quick succession. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim hallway, and there he was. Uncle Ebuka. Tall, broad-shouldered, with skin too pale for a man who lived in the sun. His eyes were darker than the room, heavy, unreadable, and his smile, it didn't reach his cheeks. It curled there like something forced. "Uncle," Adaze whispered. "Madam said I should just get rice." He stepped forward, one slow movement at a time, like a beast testing the ground. "You're not going anywhere yet," he said. His voice was thick, like syrup laced with gravel. Adaze backed away. Her heel struck a chair leg and made it scrape across the floor with a sharp squeal. She was trembling now, her breath shallow. Her hands brushed the table, the wall, anything to keep her steady. "Please, Mama Nene is expecting me." But Uncle Ebuka didn't answer. He moved faster, closing the space between them. Before she could escape, he grabbed her arm. His grip was steel. She screamed, kicked, begged. Her cries echoed through the quiet house. She swore her voice would reach someone. Anyone. But no one came. He dragged her through the corridor, past the open sitting room, toward the bedroom door. His hand never loosened. Hers clawed at the air, the wall, his wrist. Tears blurred her vision. "Let me go," she pleaded. "She'll know. She'll find out." But Uncle Ebuka was stronger and determined. Then suddenly, crash! The bedroom door flew open. A figure stood at the entrance. "Madam Nene." Her head wrapped in a dark scarf, her arms crossed, her eyes cold as stone. She didn't speak, she didn't flinch, she saw everything. Adaze's torn blouse, Uncle Ebuka's wicked hands, and with the sweat glistening on his forehead. For a moment, everything stood still. The world was holding its breath. Adaze looked at Madam Nene with wide, desperate eyes. "Please, Mama, But the woman turned and walked away. No words, no scream, no help. Just the sound of her footsteps fading into the night. Behind her, Adaze crumpled to the floor, sobbing, broken, afraid. She stayed there for hours, curled like a child, her cries softening into silence. When she finally rose, the room was empty. Uncle Ebuka was gone. His shoes were gone, his bag, his phone, vanished. By morning, the house felt hollow, a house stripped of its owner. Adaze, in shock, walked to the shop. Her hands were cold, her eyes blank. Madam Nene was already there, stirring a steaming pot of pepper soup, as though nothing had happened, as though the night hadn't swallowed everything. She didn't greet Adaze, she didn't ask about the rice. She just pointed at the table and said, "Start slicing onions." Later that afternoon, she stepped outside, her voice sharp and loud. "My husband is missing!" she wailed. "Since I sent Adaze to fetch rice, he has not returned." A crowd gathered. Curiosity turned to concern. Madam Nene clutched her wrapper, fell to her knees, cried out like a widow, "Where is my husband?" Adaze stood in the corner, arms crossed over her chest, her lips sealed shut. Then a voice in the crowd pointed, "Is it not you that saw him last?" Another spat. Maybe she killed him. Madam Nene turned sharply. Her eyes, now bloodshot, landed on Adaze like blades. Slap! The sound cracked through the air. "You touched my husband," she screamed. "You wanted to take him from me." Gasps spread through the crowd. Someone spat on the ground beside Adaze. Another whispered, "She's cursed." Adaze wept, shaking, defenseless. But Madam Nene wasn't done. Something beside the cooking stand, a large wooden stick, blackened by years of fire and oil. She raised it high, eyes wild. "Today I will beat the demon out of you!" And ran, stumbling, scraping her knees against the ground. But Madam Nene chased her, and in her fury, she struck something else, a pot, an old round pot tucked away in the corner. It rolled once, then again, then stopped, and then round and black with carvings around its edges, old symbols, faded from time but still sharp in spirit. Everyone in the village had seen that pot. It sat quietly by the corner of Madam Nene's cooking space, always sealed, never touched. Some thought it was a family heirloom. Others thought it was for special recipes. No one dared ask. But now the lid slid open, not with a bang, but with a sound so soft it made the silence loud, like the hiss of a sleeping snake disturbed from slumber. Then came the smell. Sharp. Bitter. Wrong. Not fish, not meat. Something older. Something darker. People took a step back. One woman, the butcher's wife, leaned forward to peek inside. She saw something. Her lips parted. Her knees buckled. And then she screamed. Long, like her soul was being pulled from her throat. Others rushed in. One by one they looked. One by one they screamed. Men stumbled back, covering their mouths. A woman fainted beside the firewood stand. A small boy ran. One of the elders retched near the pepper table. Inside the pot was a head. A human head. It stared upward, eyes open, lifeless, mouth dark, neck cut clean. It was Ebuka. Adaze stepped backward, stumbling over her own feet. She fell, but her eyes never left the pot. Ebuka's face was frozen, not in fear, not in pain, but in a strange expression, like he was about to say something important and time had robbed him of the last word. But that wasn't all. Beneath his head was another, and another, smaller. Children. Tiny faces, their features twisted in horror, their eyes wide, some still glistening with long-dried tears. One girl had beads in her hair, another boy looked like he was sleeping. Grace, Ife, Chuka, names that echoed in Umuoke years ago. Names whispered with sadness. Children who had vanished one by one just before each Christmas, and now they had all returned, in a pot. The screams became a storm, shouts, cries, curses. The villagers tore at their hair, some threw sand in the air. A man ripped off his shirt and fell to his knees. Adaze, she couldn't move, she couldn't cry. She just stared into the pot, into the past, into the truth. Madam Nene stood still. She hadn't moved since the pot tipped. Her face was dry, untouched by emotion. Her eyes were not shocked, not frightened, just still, like a woman who had waited a long time for this day. Then came the sirens. The police arrived in a flash of noise and confusion. Boots stamped against the earth. Whistles shrieked. An officer forced the crowd to part. He stepped into the kitchen, took one look inside the pot, and froze. Another officer leaned in, then staggered backward, covering his face. A third called in backup, voice shaking. They turned to Madam Nene. "You are under arrest," one said. She didn't ask why. She didn't argue. She simply nodded. As they cuffed her hands, silence fell again. Even the wind refused to move. The villagers stood like stones, watching her being taken away. Adaze was wrapped in a shawl and led away by a social worker. She looked back once, just once. The pot was still there, open and full of secrets, full of pain, full of truth, and Umuoke would never be the same again. The room was small, just a desk, a flickering bulb, and the cold, flat silence of the Umuoke police station. Madam Nene sat on a wooden chair, her wrists cuffed, her eyes fixed on nothing. An officer across the table leaned forward. His name tag read, Inspector Chijioke. His face was lined from years of chasing liars, but even he looked uneasy. "Why?" he asked, voice low. "Why would you do something like this?" She looked at him, calmly. Her voice, when it came, was like cold water sliding down a stone well. "It was a ritual." Inspector Chijioke blinked. "What kind of ritual?" "A powerful one," she said. "One that brings people, one that brings money." She glanced around the empty room, then back at him. "I wasn't always like this. I used to sell by the roadside. My soups were good, but no one came." The light above buzzed. "One day," she continued, "a woman insulted me, right here in this village. She said my food was bland, that no matter how much pepper or crayfish I added, it still tasted like water." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "That evening I found myself walking, just walking. My feet took me to the edge of town, to a place they say is cursed. There, I met someone." "Who?" the inspector asked. She didn't answer directly. "He offered me a choice," she said. "A dark one. He said I could feed people, but I would also have to feed the pot, and every year it would have to eat." The inspector leaned in, heart thumping. "Eat what?" Her eyes locked with his. "The purest flesh," she whispered. "The flesh of a child." The room felt colder. He dropped his pen. She went on, her voice soft, almost dreamy now. "Every December I gave the pot a child, one by one, just before Christmas. Poor ones, forgotten ones, street boys no one missed, orphans. I took only small pieces, just enough for taste." Her head tilted. "That's why the food was so sweet. That's why people came from all around. They didn't know what they were tasting, but their stomachs remembered." The inspector rubbed his temples. "And this year, Adaze?" "I had chosen her," Madam Nene said without blinking. Everything was ready. The knives were clean, the pot was waiting. "But Ebuka?" Her lips thinned. "He touched her, that foolish man. He broke the rule." "Rule? No child must be defiled before the sacrifice. It spoils the power, it ruins the taste. The spirits reject it." Her voice dropped, like rain over dry soil. "So I gave them him instead. His flesh was not pure, but it was the only choice left. The pot was hungry, and I could not wait." She closed her eyes, as though remembering the decision, the wait, the silence in the kitchen as the pot began to boil. Across town, the news spread like a sickness. It slithered through alleys into doorways, past cracked windows and heavy hearts. People gathered in the village square. Parents who had lost children in years past stood with old photographs. Grace, Ife, Chuka, the ones who never came home. A mother collapsed to the ground, wailing, "She lied to us!" A father pounded his chest. "I gave her my son. She promised he would be her helper in the kitchen. She even gave me a picture. He was smiling." But now they understood. The pictures were trophies. The smiles were taken before the screams. Umuoke wept. The village square became an ocean of grief. Some fainted, some fought, others just sat, too broken to stand. They had trusted her. They had given her their children, and in return she had fed them to a pot. At the station, Madam Nene sat in silence, chains on her hands, a guard by her side. No smile, no tears. She had said all she needed to say. The pot had done the rest. Villagers of Umuoke gathered like moths around a dying flame. Not to eat, not to gossip, but to erase. The bright signboard that once blinked Neen's delight was ripped down with a long, groaning creak. Its lights flickered one time, then died. Men brought hammers. Women brought kerosene. The children were not allowed near. One by one, the chairs were broken. The tables were smashed. The walls were scraped until the paint wept. No one entered the kitchen. They stared at it like it breathed. Because despite the chains, despite the padlocks, despite the police tape, something about that room whispered. The kind of whisper you don't hear with ears, but with skin. And no one wanted to be the one to open that door. So they sealed it, with bricks, with iron, with prayer, and most of all, with fear. In the quiet hills of Otolomi, a small house sat like a secret. Walls old and soft from rain, windows thick with dust. Inside, Adaze sat wrapped in a blanket, staring through a window that faced no particular direction. Her grandmother, Mama Ijeoma, rocked slowly beside her, humming a lullaby that belonged to better days. "Adaze," she whispered, brushing the girl's hair, "you are safe now. You're home." But the girl said nothing. Not a word. Her lips hadn't moved since the night of blood and stew, since the House of Secrets slammed its door behind her. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared, as if her voice had wandered off and refused to return. Mama Ijeoma brought her tea. She tucked her in. She prayed over her at night. But Adaze was not a child anymore. She had become something else. A witness, a ghost with skin. Sometimes late at night she would rise from her bed and walk barefoot through the house, her steps soft, her eyes hollow. She would pause at the kitchen, look at the pots, then turn away. She never ate much, and she never ever touched stew. Back in Umuoke, people tried to forget. They tried to wipe the taste from their tongues, to scrub the memories from their plates. The market women whispered prayers as they sliced tomatoes. The butchers sharpened their knives more slowly. No one spoke Madam Nene's name aloud, but they still spoke, because forgetting is not the same as silence. When the moon stood still and the wind refused to move, they swore they could still smell it, the rich, spicy aroma that once brought crowds to the corner. Not pepper, not oil, something deeper, thicker. Wrong. And on certain nights, if you walked too close to the sealed kitchen, you might hear it. A soft voice, gentle, singing a lullaby. I told them not to open that pot. Then, nothing, just the hush, a thick, awful silence. Adaze sat by the window one night, watching the sky. Her eyes no longer trembled, but deep inside, something was boiling. A question, a seed, a curse. Because even if the pot was sealed, the story had not ended. Not for her, not for the village, not for whatever still whispered behind locked doors.